This is AJ from Adventure Company Gaming. I am sitting here with Nick, getting ready to do our super huge, super anticipated set review, going over pretty much every single new card in Outsiders, the new Flesh and Blood set coming out in just a couple days now. Nick, I'm excited. How about you?
I'm super excited. This is a very interesting set. We've played pre-release, so we've gotten to play with the cards a little bit, so we have some ways to speak to the cards. But yeah, I think this set's really unique and really interesting in what it brings to the game, and I'm excited to play with these cards and talk about them.
Absolutely. And as this is our first set review, I kind of want to go over two things. First thing, going to be our grading scale. Grading scale, we have bulk. And bulk doesn't necessarily mean it's complete trash or you literally throw it away, nothing like that. It just means like maybe it doesn't have a home right now, it's not playable right now, or it's just under rate compared to some other cards that already exist. Okay, the way I look at it is kind of either it's if it's draft, because we're going to do draft NCC, so if it's in draft, it kind of is like, you get into those last picks, you kind of pick it over some other cards, but not over most cards. And in CC, maybe it's just a niche card where it just has a home in a very specific alley, maybe not in everything. And then, of course, staple, right? That's what we said? Okay, I'll cut that part. Okay, and then in staple, it is pretty much, it's going to find a home, and if you're playing this character if you can play this card, you are most likely playing this card. It's very good. It's going to be in your deck, and it's going to have a power level that keeps it in your deck and relevant. Sound good?
Yeah.
All right. And then the second thing that I wanted to mention is we are going to go back over this video before the next set drops, and we're going to kind of give a quick rundown of like how we did, and based on like the meta and based on how things shake out over time.
Yeah, it would have been interesting if we did this for Uprising, because I think everyone with Icelander was like, the deck doesn't seem like it does very much. And then if we did like retrospective, because I was on the same boat, like I'd played it and I was like, it just doesn't do enough. And then retrospective, I've been like, we were wrong about the best deck in the format.
Yeah. All it took was a couple Wounded Bulls that no one was expecting, because I do remember that the first set of those was the first Icelander lists that were coming out were very much focused on like, typical wizard things. I don't think they played like any attack actions at all, because people just weren't expecting it. And then we realized that, you don't have to play off the top in this deck, so you can run like whatever you want.
Whatever, yeah.
All right, so we're going to hop right into it. And before we get started, I do want to mention the Haven Tabletop Games. The Haven is a great sponsor of this channel. Use promo code TEAMACG at checkout, link in the description. Save you 10% on singles that are already very reasonably priced. So absolutely. So we are going to dive right into it. So we're going to start with Plague Hive, the Fable. Why not start with the Fable, right? So yeah. Plague Hive is a legendary gem resource that can be used by assassins and rangers. It basically says when you pitch it, it's yellow too, which is important to know about gems. Usually they're blue, but when you pitch it, you randomly choose an inertia, blood rot, or frailty, and your opponent gets one of those. So I gave this an okay in draft, and I gave it an okay in constructed. For draft, I think it's okay. I think pitching yellows isn't the worst thing in the world in draft already, and if you're getting an added benefit of, giving them one of those tokens, most of the time, all three of those tokens in this format are going to be useful. In constructed, it also gave it an okay. I think I don't want to give it bulk. I think it has a home, maybe. Sometimes you can't rely on the token, right? So certain classes, you want to give them a frailty, you want to give them an inertia, but you can't plan on them getting one of those cards or one of those tokens.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of those sentiments. For Plague Hive, I gave it a bad in draft. So my thoughts on this are, I don't think I'm picking this over a lot of cards that just block on their face value, because with a no block in hand, it's a card you have to keep in that hand. Like no matter what you're doing with that hand, that is a hand that a card you have to keep in your 4-card hand. So also, I think that a strategy in this set, like there's no Fi in this set, there's no like explosive turns that we've really seen. I think Azalea is really the only one who can do something like explosive, big dominate attack, but I think getting to the end of the deck is something that's going to happen pretty often, and having this no block in deck that really is just a pitch card, I don't think I would want. So I don't know if I would pick this unless it's like really bottom of the pack, even though it's a Fable, which would be cool to get. I think for CC, it's better, so I gave it an okay in CC. I think this is a card that if you're playing it in those decks, Ranger, Assassin that can play this, I think you're probably playing cards that give you Ponder tokens. And I think it'd just be feel bad when like this is what you draw off Ponder. It's like that's why I don't think it's like a staple, but I do think it's really good in that you just pitch a card for even Frailty if it just gives them -1 on 2 daggers they were planning for. That's like 2 value that you got from just pitching a card, which is one more than Heart. So I think it's really cool. I think what it does is really fun. Like all the tokens I think are good in general. So like no matter which one you get is probably impactful in most situations. And then side note on this card, I think it's really fun for Ultimate Pit Fight.
We haven't been talking about the Ultimate Pit Fight too much, but it does say everyone, all opposing heroes besides you. So yeah, opposing heroes get one. So hilarious. I agree. So moving on, we're gonna go straight into the daggers. So the assassins got 3 new daggers. They got Nerf Scalpel, Orbitoclast, and Scalepeeler. Nerf Scalpel, basically they all do the same thing. They all attack for 1. They all have piercing 1. They all cost 2, and they all minus defense in some way, right? So the Nerf Scalpel is gonna, when it hits, it's gonna the next time they defend, it's going to minus their reaction cards by 1. Orbitoclast is going to do the same thing, but for non-attack actions, and Scalepeeler is going to do the exact same thing, but for equipment. I gave Nerf Scalpel an OK in draft, mainly because I think you're going to want to see it. You're going to mainly use it against Rangers, and specifically you're going to really want to use it against a Riptide, right? He's going to be using those traps. I think the Riptides are going to be trying to draft those traps, especially early. We may not know the exact good ratios in terms of like how many traps versus arrows you want, but I think Nerf Scalpel might be able to get you some attacks through that normally wouldn't, because you're going to stop those traps. I think Nerf Scalpel in Constructed is going to be a staple. I think against certain decks, because you can curate your deck a little bit better, there's going to be decks that you definitely want to use this against, and you can kind of pick and choose between the token that we have, which is Spider's Bite, which hits attacks, and then Nerf Scalpel, which hits reactions. I think those are really good. Orbitoclast hitting non-attack actions, I think I gave it bulk in draft. I think there's just not enough, and I think you really want to get the attack actions out of their hand more than the non-attacks typically. I gave it an OK in Constructed, mainly just because I think there's going to be some decks where, like Wizard or something, who's blocking with mainly non-attacks, that I think, and specifically Kano, but where they're going to be trying to block with some non-attacks, you may make that a little awkward for them. And then Scalepeeler, finally. Equipment, I gave it bulk both in draft and Constructed. I just don't really think it's that great. I think hitting equipment is very niche already. I mean, I guess against very specific heroes. In Constructed, mainly Oldham, it makes their shield block for 1 less, but I think there's better ways to deal with that already. So, Nick, how do you feel about the daggers?
Yeah, I'll agree with you with Scalepeeler. I gave that one a bad in draft. There's not much equipment that blocks in general, and if someone Scalepeelers you, then you can just wait to use your equipment at a later point anyways. And then I gave it an OK in Constructed. This is just because I think there is like a space for it, especially with Flick Knives being able to like give that debuff and then maybe equip something later on. So I think it's fine. I think it's the worst of them, at least right now. There's not many heroes where this is better than just any of the other daggers. And then I gave Orbitoclast and Nerf Scalpel goods. So I think those are staples. Orbitoclast, the fact that like against decks that are playing a lot of non-attack actions, something like Azalea, or maybe they have like a ton of buffs, those are things that they're blocking with, or other classes like Rhinar, where maybe they have like barraging beatdowns. Any deck that like relies on those things, Warrior has a bunch of non-attack actions, like it's probably pretty good value. And then I think my favorite one is Nerf Scalpel. The fact that it hits D-reacts and you can actually flick knives in response to a D-react to debuff it before it resolves is like very gross and very good. And I also think the fact that it also debuffs attack reactions, so something against Dory, like this is stopping their D-reacts from fully getting value and their attack reactions when they block with them from getting value, I think is really good. So yeah, 2 staples in 1.
I think you might convince me a little bit on the Constructed ratings more than the draft ratings. I don't know. I don't like Orbitoclast in draft at all. I just think it's a little niche. I don't know. I do kind of see where you're coming from, but I don't know. We'll have to see. I think most of the time you're just playing Spider Bite and Nerf Scalpel. Um, Okay, so Redback Shroud is our first legendary that we're going to go over. First of all, I love the art, but that's not what we're grading here. So Redback Shroud is an assassin equipment chest piece. It blocks for 1, and it has Battle Worn, right? So it doesn't break when you block with it. And it says, when Redback Shroud is in your graveyard at the start of your turn, you may destroy 2 silver you control. If you do, equip Redback Shroud. And then it has an attack reaction, destroy Redback Shroud. The next other attack reaction card you play this turn, it costs 1 less to play. So in draft, I gave this card an okay, and in constructed, I gave it bulk. Unfortunately, as much as I like the art, and while it's not going to be bulk, I do know that just for our rating system. But anyway, so okay in draft, I think it does everything you need to. It blocks for 1, which isn't super common on all equipment in draft. And limited, and then its attack reaction is actually pretty decent. There are attack reactions we'll get to, mainly an assassin, that do cost 1. Mainly the spikes come to mind as really good attack reactions that you don't really want to pay for if you don't have to. So I think that's where this card really will come into play. You don't have a way to buy it back with silver in draft, which thank God, kind of, because I think blocking with equipment over and over again would be kind of really good. So I think they balanced it well, not really giving us silver for draft. And then in constructed, unfortunately, I gave it a bulk because I think Tunic is just not gonna. I think you're just not gonna replace this card over Tunic. I think, and you have 2 other pieces that you can buy back, mainly the boots and the Mask of Perdition. Both have really good effects that I don't mind putting those in those slots, whereas Tunic, it's really hard presses me to replace it. I'd have to basically be buying it back like every other turn to get the value that I'd want to see out of it over Tunic, and I don't really know if there's a world where that happens in either Arachne or Azuri.
Yeah, for draft, I gave Redback Shroud a good, just because, or a staple. I think that having blocking equipment in this format and draft in this set seems difficult to get. There's not much of it. The Seeker stuff doesn't block at all. There's cards like Widowmaker where like you definitely wish you had blocking equipment, which we'll talk about later, but I think that card's great. So having any blocking value on equipment I think is good. And also, I think it has a game-winning effect where like you can spike at any point for free. You could have a 2-card hand and like play something and spike it off of this thing after you've already blocked with it, which could just win you the game. So I think that's super strong. For constructed, I gave it an okay. I think, like you mentioned, you would have to basically get it every other turn for it to match Tunic value. I think in most situations you're not using Tunic as soon as you get it in Assassin, so sometimes it is sticking around like the 3 counters for 4 turns. So I do think it's difficult with already 2 other pieces to buy back having a third. Like you need 6 silver to be able to buy back everything. Probably not happening. Getting 4 isn't like the most unreasonable thing to get boots and mask. But I do think there might be a deck where this fits in, where somehow you're getting that enough silver to consistently buy it back. Being able to keep blocking with it is like really good value. And the fact that you can immediately, when the game starts, like if you go second, the first impactful turn, you can immediately do a reaction or a pummel off of a blue pitch is pretty strong. So I think there might be a place for it. Hopefully in the future it just gets better, because like you said, the art's really good and it's a cool effect. But right now I think it's just okay.
I mostly would agree with all of that sentiment. Yeah, I mean, that's an easy one. I think we are a little, I think you kind of have a point with your staple in draft, but I think definitely I think we're both pretty much on the same page in CC. Yeah. So then we're gonna hit the Assassin specific Majestics. So first one on the list is going to be Infiltrate. Infiltrate is a 0-cost red Majestic. It hits for 3. And it blocks for 3, which is both very good stat line. It has stealth, which may come into play with Azuri and just Azuri, really. I guess in draft, we're talking about draft too, so it does work with the new young Arachne as well. But it also has the effect when this hits a hero, banish the top card of their deck. You may play it until the end of their turn. So I gave this a okay in draft, and I gave it a okay in constructed as well. So what kept me from giving it a staple in draft was specifically the Ranger matchup. I think there's too many cards in Ranger that if you're playing against Ranger that they don't, you can't play them. So banishing the card doesn't really feel super good. I don't think in draft we're gonna have as many fatigue matchups as we did in our pre-releases sealed. I like to think that we're gonna be getting damage in more often. So that was the only thing that it was like if we had something in the middle of that, I probably would have put it in the middle. I think against other assassins and definitely against ninjas, you can kind of catch them off guard with this. So I think that's pretty fun. But yeah, I think that's the only thing that was keeping me from holding it back from a staple in draft. And then in constructed, I gave it an okay. I think this card in constructed, it's just really, I just don't know how many times we're going to hit with our stealth attacks in Azuri. And I don't know how often, even when we do hit with this card, how impactful playing that card will be. Think about all the times that you draw a random card in other decks, and how much that is kind of hit or miss, and now we're drawing a random card off the top of our opponent's deck if it's not even made to synergize with ours. So that was kind of where I went okay with it. And then the thing that kind of brought me back from putting it down was if you are playing a contract deck, this does fulfill contracts as well if they're already on the chain. So that's kind of a cute interaction that I think maybe this entices a block for that reason. So that kind of made me a little bit higher on the card.
Yeah, this one I just gave staple in both formats. I just think it's in Arachne like a 3-go again that can like mill them, maybe give you a card that you can play. The fact that it's a 3-block, I think, of course, is good. The fact that you can play on your next turn, so even if Arachne gives us go again, you don't want to play it now, you want to play it your next turn, it's good. You can get a D-react off of it. I think like the ceiling for it's pretty high, and I think as stealth becomes better, this is probably always going to be just like a card you'll consider playing because the effect is like pretty impactful. So I think in both formats you probably, if you see this card, are like, oh, this is a pretty good in draft, like, oh, this is a pretty good stealth card. And in CC, if you're playing like Azuri, it seems pretty good. Something that Arachne could play, like you mentioned, where it's just a free banish a top card, and not only are you getting silver maybe from a contract, but you can also like play that card if it's a non-attack action, attack action you could play other than like an arrow. I think it's also interesting that like you can do something to where they seekers in draft, and so they opted and got like a specific card on top of your deck, and now you're threatening the top card of their deck. So if they were trying to stack something for Rabble or for Azalea, you're like threatening what they tried to opt and stack up there. So I do think that there's that kind of niche usage for it too. So yeah, I think it's good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how this card shakes out. I think it's one of the more interesting effects that we're getting this set. For sure. Yeah. It's one of the first ones I think where you can truly just play your opponent's card. Mm-hmm. So the next Majestic is Shakedown. Shakedown is an Azuri specialization. It says, if you've played or activated an attack reaction this chain link, Shakedown has, when this hits a hero, choose red, yellow, or blue. They reveal their hand, banish a card of the chosen color. It does attack for 6, block for 3, cost 2, but that doesn't really matter in Azuri too much, and pitches for 1. It's a red card. So Shakedown, I gave a staple in draft. I think if you see this card in your draft and you're already in Azuri, I think there's no way you don't pick it. I think it's one of the better cards you can pick. It can usually plus you a card. If you lead with like the dominate stealth card that we'll get to, and then you go Azuri into this card, I think that can, one, they've wasted a block most likely, and two, if it does hit, then you've also minus them another card, which I think can be really detrimental in this format. And then in constructed, I just don't know if there's a world in where you play Azuri and you're not playing this card. I think it's one of the strongest effects. If you're playing Azuri, this is one of the biggest payoffs you can have. Minusing your opponent, again, a card, I just think it's very strong, especially in a world with pummel, which you can pummel this, which is very important. So yeah, no, I think this card is going to be, again, very good in Azuri, especially going forward. I think this is one of the better payoff specialization cards that we have.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's no world in which you're just not playing this in Azuri. I give also a staple in draft and CC. I think in both formats it's pretty insane. In draft, being able to swap any stealth card into this Like in draft, you're probably not giving 2 cards to a stealth card because like 3 cards really matters in this format. I don't think you're doing much off 2 cards other than like swinging for 6 maybe. But I do think this format is one that requires having more cards to do what you want to do on a turn, it seems like. So I don't think you're throwing 2 cards at a stealth card. This is probably always hitting. And if you just call a red, you're probably just taking their best card from their hand. Ripping cards in this game is insane. In CC, in CC, like being able to swap into ripping a card, and like you mentioned, this is a pummel target. And the ability says if you've played or activated an attack reaction, so you can actually just pitch and play this with Azuri, and so the effect isn't live yet, and then pummel it, and then both effects are live for getting rid of 2 cards. So I think it is really interesting that you can turn on its effect, not just with Azuri's ability. So ripping 2 cards is wild. So
I love the flavor too. Like you're being shaken down, like straight up. You're being like mugged. Like let me see what you got. I'm taking something. Yeah. All right. Yeah, go ahead.
Great card. That's it.
Oh yeah, for sure. All right, so Spreading Plague is our last assassin-specific majestic, and I really like this card actually, but it's a yellow. So it pitches for 2. It costs 1, and it says create X Bloodrot Pox tokens where under the defending hero's control, where X is the number of defending cards this chain link, and it's an attack reaction for 3. So, or that blocks for 3. So already any reaction that blocks for 3 is pretty good. One reason I really like this card is you can get into these play patterns, I think, with the Azuri where they're over blocking like a stealth card already because they're just afraid of like the Command and Conquer in CC, or even like in draft, they're afraid of a Shakedown or one of the bigger attacks like Sneak Attack that can come through. And so they're just getting ready. They're getting to that point where they're going to block with more than 1 card off the bat. And then you can activate Azuri, or you can activate this reaction where they think you're going to Azuri, but really you're just punishing them for blocking with more cards. I think that's really, really strong. Now, one thing I guess it will say, if they choose not to block and they're just eating damage, that's kind of where you get punished for having this card in your hand, right? So I did give it a staple for draft, specifically for that reason. I think draft, if it's anything like sealed, it's a really block heavy format, so this just helps you punish them for blocking. And then in constructed, I did give this a staple for assassins as well. If we're playing a world where Azuri actually wants to kill our opponent, which he doesn't mill like Arachne, I think this card also does help you get there if they're a block heavy deck. So if they're blocking with a lot of cards, they're going to be able to pay off the Bloodrot Pox tokens. So yeah, I think this is going to be a pretty good card in Azuri.
Yeah, I also gave this a staple in draft and CC. I think this card's amazing. In draft, like, again, it is, like you said, a block-heavy format. A Bloodrot Pox token in either format is almost unblockable damage, because if they're blocking you and they still want to play a turn, like, they probably aren't keeping a blue to stop 2 damage, so it's almost unblockable damage. Also in CC, I guess in draft 2, this is something that affects equipment blocks. It just says if they defending cards. So if they give you like a card or 2 cards and a piece of equipment, 2 pieces of equipment and a card, you're giving them 3 Bloodrot Pox. You did a 1 for 6 reaction, which is really good. And they're not stopping all that damage because they're not keeping 3 blues. So yeah, I think this card's amazing. It also doesn't have to target any specific type of attack. So you can like CNC them and they give you like armor and 2 cards because maybe they're playing around pummel or whatever it is, and then you just Spreading Plague them, and now they're eating 6 to 8 damage maybe, depending on how many cards they gave you. So I do think this card is really good. I've seen people compare it to like Twinning Blade, where you're like, it's like a card that has this effect where you're like punishing them for how they decided to play against you. And I think against decks that are trying to block you out, like in every assassin deck I've made in CC that I've tested so far, I just like have put this as 3 of in the sideboard because this is just so good into decks that are trying to block you out.
Absolutely. No, we both agree there. So easy to move on from that one. So next one's going to be Backstab. Backstab, we're not going to go over like every card in the cycle, pretty much just the card overall. So we're not going to be like, red is this, yellow is this, blue is this. We'll be here all night. Anyway, yeah. So Backstab is one of the rares that you can get in the set as an attack. It has stealth, and it just says defense reactions can't be played to Backstab's Chainlink. So attacks for 3, blocks for 3, and it costs 0. Pretty much every stealth attack, I believe, pretty much follows that stat line of 0, 3, and 3. I think. So pretty much we're just going to go over those effects real quick in terms of like how good are they in both draft and CC. So Backstab, I'm going to give it an okay in draft, and I'm going to give it kind of a bulk in constructed. I think specifically in draft, there is a world where you can pump this and then with a reaction specifically, right? And so if you've already moved past blocks and they didn't overblock, expecting like either Azuri or you're playing Arachne in draft, there's a world where they only block this with one card, and then you can like pump it, right? And they can't respond. They could like brush off or something though, but they can't respond with like a trap or something. And then in constructed, I just think this isn't one of the stealth attacks that I think Azuri is going to want to be playing, and so for that I just think it's bulk, honestly.
And for those reasons, I'm out.
Yeah.
So for this card, I gave it okay in both formats. I think it's a fine card to pick in drafts because you can give it a go again if you're playing Arachne. It's a flip swap card with Azuri, which can also be pumped, and they can't react like you mentioned with the D-react or trap. I do think this has some play in CC where right now, like if you play a stealth card and you activate Azuri to swap, if they're anticipating it's something like CNC or the new one, Wreak Havoc, they would respond before the card gets played with a D-react so that they can get around the effects of like Wreak Havoc and CNC. This would stop them from being able to do that because you can't play D-reacts to its chain link, and then once you've swapped out into CNC or Wreak Havoc, then they still can't play D-reacts. So I think there is that like niche component of actually fully turning off their D-reacts for that chain link that you're trying to swap something in for. But outside of that, the card's like, nah, it's fine.
So on to Sneak Attack. Sneak Attack is our next attack. It is another rare. It costs 2, and it says if you've played it costs 2, attacks for 3 and blocks for 2. But it says if you've played it or activated an attack reaction this chain link, Sneak Attack actually has +4. And I think this card is pretty much going to be a staple in draft, and then I think it's going to be bulk in constructed. I think as far as draft is concerned, this is almost always a 7 attack in Azuri. You're going to start with a stealth attack, and then you're going to switch it out for this card. And so I think, pretty much cheating in a 7 attack for free is pretty good. Well, not really for free. It's kind of like a sink below cost or E-strike costs, but I think coming in for 7 is always really strong because you're always going to fulfill that condition with Azuri, right? Same as her specialization. In constructed, I just think there's better things you can be doing with Azuri's effect. You really want powerful on-hit effects, I think, for Assassin. Otherwise, I think you just lose races. Anything that's just damage is not going to really be good enough, in my opinion. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a staple, like you mentioned, in draft, so I definitely think this card's amazing in draft. I also think there's the capabilities of it being able to be targeted by other cards because of its low base stat value. So like the blue one is a 1 base, so it can like be banished off looking for scraps or be buffed by the attack reactions that care about low base attacks on the yellow and blue being 2 and 1 specifically. I think the card's great as a swap target, of course. I think in CC I gave it like a okay. It's not staple, and it might be bulk. This is one I was a little maybe generous on, because you're essentially just doing an E-strike. If you do stealth card swap into this, you're just doing E-strike for 7 essentially, with the ability of being able to like play. I don't know. This is an assassin card, so whatever that means for your deck.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. That's fair. Like it's still an assassin card. So
yeah. A pummel target, yeah, I think it's okay. Maybe bulk in CC, but I think it's pretty draft, yeah.
Okay, so moving on to the spikes. These are a set of assassin attack reactions. We have 1 for each token. So we have Blood Rot, Frailty, and Inertia. They all cost 1. They all block for 3, which those assassin reactions blocking for 3 is so good. But they all do the same thing. They're all going to buff your stealth cards by 3, but they're all going to give your hero, the opposing hero, a different token based on what they are, if that attack that you're reacting to hits, right? So I gave these all in draft a staple. If you're in Assassin, I think these are all wonderful. Anytime you can react with more damage, especially 3, and all of these tokens I feel like were made specifically to react with all the heroes in this set. So even Frailty hits both the weapons, and then it's like, oh, but also the arsenal, so it hits the rangers too. So I think these are definitely staples all in draft. And then in constructed, I gave them OKs, mainly because I don't know how good actually hitting with our stealth cards is going to be in CC. I'm not convinced on it just yet. I think a lot of the times if you're mixing these spikes with other things like pummels where you want to hit your 2-cost cards, I just think you're starting to clunk up the deck a little bit, hitting those both stealth cards and those 2-cost cards, and then the other reactions you might want to be playing. I just think it's maybe a little clunky. I just got to see it play out in practice, but yeah, that's where I'm at.
Yeah, no, I agree with all that. I think, yeah, for these cards, I gave them all just staples in draft and CC. So for draft, I think reactions are amazing. Like, reactions in a draft format is like the way of guaranteeing damage. There are stealth cards, which we'll get to, that actually have on hits already. So if you like Blood Rot, spike with Blood Rot, the Blood Rot stealth card, you're giving them 2 Blood Rots if the attack hits. So if they don't have a reaction, you attack react it, you're giving them 4 more damage, I think is really good. I think all of these are great. Frailty is like the most niche one where it's not always going to give you the most value, but for example, the Blood Rat one is a 1 for 5 if that attack hits, so a 1 for 5 block 3 seems great. But like you mentioned in CC, I think these cards, if you're playing a stealth hero moving forward, are just always going to be a staple. Like, you want them, you're going to want to think about having them in your deck or maybe sideboard or whatever it is. Just because like inertia is so strong into so many heroes, Frailty does a lot to a lot of heroes. Blood Rot, of course, just damage is always good. Yeah, and 3 blocks, like you mentioned, are great. So yeah, I just gave them staple in both because I think they're good.
Okay, for the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cards, I am just going to give you the effect. They all they all are the assassin attacks that have stealth, and they all are 0 cost, 3 attacks, 3 blocks. So first off, we're going to start with Infect. This one has stealth, of course, and then it also says when this hits a hero, create a Blood Rot Pox token. I gave this a staple in draft and then an OK in constructed. Staple in draft, I think just giving threatening a Blood Rocks means they're forced to block it, which I think is always good. Anytime you can force a card out of your hand or opponent's hand is really good. In constructed, I give it an OK because if you just lead with this card, I think there's a lot of times they just eat it. But maybe it forces a block, but then it makes your Azuri switch not as good if they're already blocking it, right? So, yeah, let's just rapid fire these as fast as we can.
Okay, yeah. In fact, I gave it a staple in both formats. I think it's a 0 for 5, essentially. In Arachnia, it has Go again. And I think this is one that if you are playing spikes, super strong. And I think it's probably, if you see it in draft, it's great. And then it's probably a consideration if you're playing a stealth hero. So.
Absolutely. So Isolate, same thing, just has Dominate. I think this card is probably this one I might spend just a tiny bit more time on because I think this card is really good in Azuri, in both formats, right? Because having Dominate on the card just means that like you can only block with 1 card, right? So unless you have an attack reaction or one of the instants, I think it definitely means that your Azuri switch is going to hit. Whatever it is, it's probably going to hit. So I think that's really strong in both formats. I think this is going to be a card that she definitely wants to maybe even play the Rainbow of in Constructed because, again, it's just that good. Only allowing them to block with 1 card, especially when you have like a CNC behind it or something like that, it's going to be really strong.
Yeah, I think one way to neuter an Azuri turn is just to give them 2 cards on their stealth card, and then they're just arseling and passing, probably. So yeah, I think I've seen people play this in Rainbow and Constructed in decks that they're testing with Azuri just because they can't do that. Like, they can literally only give you 1 card from hand. So I think this is probably going to be a staple, especially in Azuri specifically.
Okay, so Malign is going to be the this one's effect is that it just can't be damage from Malign can't be prevented. I think this is going to be okay in draft. I think sometimes that comes up if you're going to react over top of this, and then a lot of the defense reactions, other than traps, defense reactions in quotes, are prevention effects, so that could be very good. I think in constructed, this card's just bulk. I think as of right now, there's not really a home for it. Prevention is sort of still niche. I know that Oldham, of course, prevents quite a lot, but that's 1 hero. I think prevention effects aren't really going to be huge. I think this card's not really going to see much play in constructed.
Yeah, I think the fact that it only does preventing damage, but then like it doesn't do anything else, it's just damage. So I don't think it's great. I gave this a okay in draft, and then this is bulk in CC.
Next one is Prowl. Its effect reads that the next attack with stealth, you play this combat chain gains +1. I think this is a hard slam in in draft, especially if you already know you're going Arachne, who gives stealth cards go again. I think this is huge in his deck. I think this is very, very good. However, I do think as of right now, this card is bulk and constructed. Mainly because the only two heroes we have in constructed are going to be Adult Azuri and then Arachne from Dynasty, and I think neither one of those heroes can reliably give your stealth attacks go again or get extra action points, and so for that reason I just don't think its effect buffing the next one is really impactful, at least as of right now.
Yeah, I gave this an okay in draft. I think just because it's specifically essentially good in Arachne, it is a swap target for Azuri, so I guess it's fine for that. You're just not getting the benefit of its effect. But I think in Arachne, it's very good. And then I do think this is bulk in constructed because there's no hero. Like, unless you're razoring a stealth card, like you're razoring this or snapping it to then play another stealth card, and that's still low value. Like, I just don't think this is going to see play in constructed.
Right, I don't think so either. So Sedate's our next one. It has the effect when this hits a hero, create an inertia token under their control. Again, I think this is very good. Anytime you're giving your opponent one of the tokens from this set, I think that's huge, right? So, and of course we have all the reactions to kind of make sure this hits, and of course sometimes they just overblock it anyway, right? But I think this is a windmill slam if you're already in. Especially if you know you're an assassin. I don't know if this is like a pack one pick one kind of thing, but I do know if like you're probably like pack one pick 4 or 5 and you know you're going assassin, you maybe not even know which one, but you're definitely going assassin, you're definitely, I think, grabbing this card. So definitely. And then in constructed, it's okay. Again, I'm just not really high on the stealth cards for too much on their own in CC.
Yeah, I gave this a staple in both formats. I think like everything you mentioned in draft is right. Like inertia in draft is great, ripping a card from them potentially because they're gonna have to block this or not have an arsenal. So either way, you're getting cards at some point. This is a card you could react to or swap out with Azuri, so it's great. I think for CC, also a staple just because it's immediately threatening something that I think is very impactful in constructed. It also threatens you like playing a spike on top of it, and then you might give them a blood rot and an inertia or something. And then of course it's something that Azuri can swap into. So I think again for a stealth hero, this is probably going to just always be a consideration of something that you want to play.
And then finally we have Wither, and Wither is going to be the one that says when it hits a hero, create a frailty token under their control. And so I think frailty, specifically in draft, is going to be very huge, right? I think frailty hits every single hero that's in draft. So it hits the dagger hero, so it hits ninja and assassins very well because they basically their daggers are nil this turn unless they have one of the buff cards for their daggers. But even then, you're still getting value out of it, right? And then also the Rangers have to play out of Arsenal, which frailty also affects that as well. In constructed, again, I'm just still on that okay because I just don't know how good the stealth cards are going to be in a constructed format.
Yeah, this is a card that I think it's a staple in draft. Like you mentioned, I think frailty is very strong in draft, even in pre-release games, like giving someone a frailty that had like changed their turn completely on what they were going to do. I think that can happen in constructed too, depending on what hero you're playing against. But I think just because it's less always good in constructed, I just gave this an okay.
Okay, and then finally our last assassin specific card is going to be Razor's Edge, one of the first, I think this was the first card spoiled out of the set. It says target attack action card with stealth gains +3 and it costs 0 and blocks for 3, of course. I gave Razor's Edge a staple in draft. I think again reactions are very good. A lot of the stealth cards, especially in draft, all the tokens are very impactful, especially on a lower life format. And I just think that this card is going to be probably a high pick out of the pack. Any kind of really impactful reaction, especially for free. You can keep a stealth card in this card and just those two, and you'll be able to play the card and buff the card, which I think is really good. And so there's that. And then, of course, in Constructed, I gave it okay because, again, we're just falling back into how I feel about the stealth cards in general in CC. I think you definitely have to play them if you're playing Azuri, of course, because that's how our hero effect works. But outside of that, I don't know how often you're really trying to push damage in CC with the stealth cards in particular.
Yeah, I agree. I think in draft, this is a staple. Again, reactions are super good. I just think about how many times in like Welcome to Wraith draft or even in like a constructed Dorinthia deck where someone's like, if you have Iron Song response, I guess I lose here. And this is essentially Iron Song response on a stealth card. Like no restriction, just play it. So I think that's really strong. The fact that it's free and you could push a stealth card effect like Blood Rod or something, like one of those tokens that they create. I think it's okay in Constructed. I don't think a deck focusing on like pushing stealth damage is going to be good specifically, and that's all this card is good for. I think the spikes are better because they're pushing something else as well that's impactful. This is just damage on its face, so yeah, I think it's just okay in CC.
All right, so now we're moving on to ninja specific cards. We have Mask of Many Faces, our first new ninja card. It's a common equipment. Blocks for 1, has Blade Break, and then it has the effect, it's an instant. It says pay 1, destroy Mask of Many Faces, name a card. The next attack action card you play this turn gains that name. So I gave this an okay in draft. Maybe I'm on the fence about that. Maybe you were a little generous on a card. Maybe I was a little hard on a card. I do think specifically for both ninjas, I guess, because you're still going to be drafting, even if you're playing Benji or Katsu, you're still going to be drafting combo cards. There could be a time where naming a card before a combo piece, especially maybe even more in Benji because you can't search them as easily. So this kind of makes it so that you are able to play those combos a little bit easier. And even in Katsu, being able to, start with any card, or maybe even the middle pieces of combo lines are pretty hard to find maybe sometimes in draft, and you need that last piece to get to a big Dishonored turn or something like that, right? So I do think that's pretty good. I do like that it's an instant, so you can kind of pick and choose when, especially in draft. So maybe I should have bumped this up to a staple, but we're gonna go for okay for now. Basically, the one thing I don't like is that you're going to get one or the other, right? It's either Blade Break or the effect. So really, the armor on this card almost doesn't matter, right? Because most of the time, I think you're going to be breaking this for its effect if you're drafting it, or you're planning to at least. It does have that option though. In Constructed, I gave this bulk not because its effect is inherently bad in a vacuum. I think its effect is actually probably even better in Constructed than it is in draft. But it's just fighting for places against things like Mask of Momentum and Mask of the Pouncing Links, where it's just those masks are just infinitely better than this card.
Yeah, I gave this a staple in draft just because I think blocking equipment is super strong. I think the effect is pretty amazing. The fact that like if you have a Bonds in hand and that's it, you can just name a Gust Wave off of this and then play Bonds, and Bonds could get you a Dishonor or any other free combo card. Like Bonds is probably 6 to 8 damage depending on what you're able to get, which is amazing. So being able to turn on Bonds, I think, especially in the draft format, in CC it's amazing too. 0 for 8 of course is great. And then I agree with you. I think this is probably bulk in Constructed just because Ninja has 2 of the best headpieces in the game, and Lynx and Mask of Momentum, and I don't think you ever choose this over those unless you just don't own those cards, which Lynx is already like a budget option. So I think Lynx is probably always better anyways. If the argument is that, I don't want to like get a legendary, I think Lynx is probably always better than this anyway. So yeah, I think it's great in draft and not good in CC.
All right. Cyclone Roundhouse is the next, is the first of the Majestics that we're going to go through. It's going to be a little out of order because we're going to go through the Majestics and then the combo pieces like on the down the line. Maybe in the future we'll do them all at once, so we'll plan that better. But Cyclone Roundhouse is a Majestic for Ninja. It is yellow. It costs 2. Attacks for 5, defense for 3. Has the text combo. If Spinning Wheel Kick was the last attack this combat chain, this has at the beginning of the reaction step, banish a random defending card from each chain link. And so a lot of times when people read this, they don't recognize that the first part of what this card actually can do is it says defending card, doesn't say defending attack action card, reaction card, anything like that, any card. Equipment counts. Those are cards. So if they do decide to block with equipment earlier in the chain, you are going to be able to banish those cards. And then this says at the beginning of the reaction step, right? It doesn't have to hit. So I do think that's also an important distinction. So I did give this a bulk in draft, mainly because I don't think it has any use case really in draft other than being a 5 damage combo card that can be searched off bonds, which you'd have to get 2. So even then, like, I don't think that's going to be really realistic. And then in constructed, I gave it an okay. I didn't want to give it bulk. I'm not really big on the spinning wheel kick line, all those things. I just don't know how good it is. The other thing, I didn't want to give it bulk though, because I do think there may be a world where if we know that armor is becoming like really big, of course there's Oldham, of course, but if there's ever really heavy armor blocking heroes, and this may be an out to them, right? If they start getting block happy with like their shields, or maybe there's a chest piece with a similar effect, this can banish those. So it's got a use, but I just don't know how much it's going to be used in constructed. But I didn't want to give it bulk because I do think it has a use case.
Yeah. For draft, I gave this a staple. Reason being is
Our first big disagreement.
Yeah, this is a very big disparity. I think in this format, the best thing, like one of the strongest things you can do is just threaten 6 damage on a turn. Like there's not many amazing turns. Draft is probably going to be different with something like Katsu. Maybe you can threaten a lot more, but I think the fact that you can like blue pitch, swing for 6, Kodachi in this is like actually pretty good. And if you do get spinning wheel kick, like this is just an upside to that. So I do think just the fact that it's a 3 block that has like it's a pretty good rate. A 2 for 5 is okay because you have a Kodachi before it with the blue pitch. I gave this an okay in constructed because, like you mentioned, banishing equipment is hilarious. So you can, if they shield one of your Kodachis, you can be like, "See ya," and just flick that thing off.
Fling it away, kick it away.
So I do think that's really cool. I also think it's cool that this is almost unblockable damage because if they give you a card, that card is just getting banished. Because it counts itself. So if they give you a 3 block on this, because of this, so they can't just 3 block it.
Before the reaction step, for sure. They can still react to it, right? But yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so if they give you 2 cards, one of those is going away and they're taking some damage here. So I do think that's interesting. Then you can like crack boots and like know you're going to get Katsu's effect for whatever, or like a mass trigger or something. I think this is a good mass trigger card. I do not like that if you try to play Twin Twisters, Spinning Wheel Kick, and this, it costs 4. I do wish that whole line just costs 3. But Spinning Wheel Kick, of course, already has Go Again, so you can do that into this for a blue. But yeah, I think it's okay. I think you'll have to build a deck where this fits really well into it. And on its face, I don't think it's great.
All right, next one's going to be Dishonor. Dishonor has gotten a lot of hype since it's been spoiled. Kind of one of the more crazier effects we've ever seen in Flesh and Blood in general, but bit of work to get to it. So Dishonor reads, it's a blue, it costs 0, it attacks for 2 base and defends for 3, and it says combo if Bonds of Ancestry was the last attack this combat chain, this says +2. And then when this hits a hero, if you control Surging Strike, Descendant Gust Wave, and Bonds of Ancestry, that hero loses all abilities for the rest of the game. So, as crazy as that effect is, I gave it an okay in draft. I think one of the biggest reasons this is just okay and not bulk is that it is a blue block 3 that costs 0, right? So immediately that's just screaming Kodachis, easy Kodachis, so it's not a bad card in that rate, and it's still a 0 for 2, so Benji's going to most likely get this through if he just has to send an attack. So I think that's pretty good in draft. In constructed, I gave it a staple, but I was a little on the fence. I will just say, I think while the effect is nuts, it doesn't have like the strongest effect against every hero. And it's a lot of work to get to it, and it's a lot of work that's very telegraphed. So, and a lot of times, most of the time, sometimes you'll have a reaction to play on this, but most of the time you'll be spending all your cards to get to Dishonor. So it's kind of like where I think like it does command a block. It is a lot of damage throughout that combo line. But as far as this effect on its own, I think I did give it staple, but I was kind of on the fence about it.
Yeah, I agree with what you said about draft. I also gave this an okay. I don't think it's amazing. I don't think you're going to get the combo effect ever, probably, in draft.
We might get a combo effect. I mean, just once Bonds of Ancestry, right? So.
Yeah, but not the other one. But yeah,
right.
If it's a 0 for 4 blue, sure, that's good. But I think that's also going to be hard to get off. So I think it's okay. 0 cost blue, 3 block is good. I do think this is a staple in CC. Because playing with Katsu with the new line, as soon as you see a Dishonor, you just block with it, and that immediately means every bonds you see in the future gives you 4 more damage. Even if it's not for full effect, it's just a red Fluster Fist that you get to search for whenever. That sometimes might turn off their hero ability, which against heroes like Dromai or Oldham might be like actually
game winning.
Yeah, it's game winning. So I do think that just the fact that it turns a red bonds into 0 for 8 is amazing. It also turns on your Kodachis. It's a 3 block. It's a combo card that works with Flick Flack. Like, I think it's just everything you want in a blue card in Katsu.
Our next Majestic is going to be Headley to the Tail. It's a red card. It costs 1. It's a 3 attack, and it blocks for 2. Has Go again, but its effect also reads, when this attacks, name another card. Attack action cards with that name have +1 this combat chain. So I kind of cheated a little bit. I have the sheet of our ratings. I was like, oh wait, why did I get this bulk in draft? So I changed that to a staple because I do think this card in draft specifically, I think this card is actually kind of really good. Even if it only applies to 1 more attack on the chain, I think this card, like just 1 attack on the chain, the one that comes after it or whenever, I think this card is very, very good. Probably gets you to a breakpoint. It's a head jab that costs 1, which kind of sucks, but again, it's really costs 4, right? It's more like a leg tap. You're just kind of putting that value to the next card. So I think that's pretty good on its own. And then in Constructed, I gave it an okay. I do think in certain decks it's a staple, which I know kind of counteracts what I just said, but it just depends on how good things like the Tiger line are, or if you want to play more non-draconic ninja cards and like buff your Phoenix Flames or something along those lines. I just think there's a lot of things we can be doing in ninja decks right now that don't necessarily rely on this card, especially when generic versions of this card kind of exist in Art of War, right? So it's fighting for a spot. I do think if you are playing the Tiger line, I think you're definitely playing this card, but any other deck you might not be, just because of how many of the same copy are you actually going to play of a card.
Yeah, I gave this a staple in both. I think a 1 for 4 Go again essentially in draft is amazing. Like, definitely a card you want to be playing. It threatens your Katsu effect if they like let it go, and then you could be buffing like whatever combo card or whatever starter card you're playing next. Like a head jab for 4 could come next, which is really strong. And then I think this is also a staple in CC just because it's such a, like, the Art of War buff is so strong. Of course, Art of War is every card, but even if you call like Snatch with this card, like you play this into a Snatch for 5, it's so much harder to block than just a card in armor than it's a card in a 2 block armor or 2 cards. So I think this card is really good. I'm also very high on the Tiger line, so I've played this card in that deck. And when you do Roar in this card, like, because you don't always have the Art of War, you don't always want to banish off the Art of War. So like this Roar and Pred Streak is like an insane turn. So I just like the fact that sometimes this is a 1 for 7, just depending on how many Tigers you have. So anything like that, I think makes this card really cool. And I think it's a staple because it has all of these like different ways in which you can use case it. So
absolutely. So our next card is gonna be Wander with Purpose. It's a yellow card. It costs 0. It attacks for 2, has a 3 block value, and it has Go again. It's also a Benji specialization, and it says when this hits, you may discard a card with cost 0. And if you do, search your deck for a card with combo, banish it, then shuffle. You may play it this turn. So really all this card reads is Benji gains Katsu's hero ability if this hits. And I think that's actually really strong in draft. I gave it a staple. I think that's really good in the sense that you're going to be drafting combo cards whether you like it or not in Benji. And I think this can help you get to like a line that you may not have access to otherwise. It's going to be really hard to anything that can, I think, manufacture any kind of consistency. I think this card helps you do that, right? So I think that's going to be, if you're playing Benji, I think you see this in like pack 2, you're like windmill slamming it, unless there's something really strong in the pack, like some other maybe generic or something, or a piece of equipment or something like that. But I think this is a very high pick card for Benji. But you do have to know you're playing Benji, right? So there's that caveat a little bit. In Constructed, I gave it an okay. I do not know how many cards you're going to be playing with combo in Benji, right? So I think at best, this card will fetch you like one of the higher damaging combo cards. at some point, maybe not one that you're actually trying to combo off with. So there's some merit to that if you're just trying to push damage with Benji. Of course, we're talking about Blitz here, but I think the Benji deck doesn't really want to be doing that too much. Maybe if we're talking about like something like the 100 wins line, where you don't like, you can just play a bunch of 100 wins, so it's like you're more likely to combo with it. But really, I think this card's just okay compared to other Benji cards we could be playing in Blitz of all things.
Yeah, I gave this okay in both. You're probably right that if you're playing Benji, this is very good in drafts. I don't like cards that are understated. Like, I get that it works with his ability and it becomes like pseudo unblockable. I just don't like that it's an understated card, like a 0 for 2, and that's all it does. Okay, it does manufacture if it hits some value. But yeah, it's probably a staple if you see it and you know you're on Benji, but I don't know. I just think having Katsu's ability isn't amazing, and also like if you need it to hit and it doesn't hit, then maybe that neuters your turn. I also think it's okay in Benji. I'm not a big Blitz man, but I don't think that in that deck you're playing many combo cards except maybe 100 wins, that line. Maybe like some amount of the head jab line. I think head jab recoil is actually kind of cool in Benji, but yeah, I think it's just okay. I could be wrong though.
Yeah. So moving on, we have one of my favorite cards, and it makes me so sad looking at my rating for it. So Silverwind Shuriken, it's an item card for ninjas of all things, and it's a 0-cost item. It is also blue, so this also turns on Kodachis, which is kind of nice, but it has no block value being an item, so do know that. And it's just an item that reads, as an attack reaction, you can destroy it. Target attack action card with combo gains +1, so it's basically breaking scales on an item, right? So you can run something like Tiger Stripe Shuko and Constructed, and then this card if you wanted to. However, I've given this card both bulk in draft and constructed, which makes me really sad because I really like this effect. I think it's really cool. However, going over draft, I think unfortunately, I think it's just having an unblockable card is really bad in draft. I think there's gonna be times where you need to block and this card's gonna be in your hand. Also, it's really slow. You have to attack. Maybe you like to send 2 Kodachis and then like an attack, and then you play this card, you end your turn. That kind of feels bad. Its effect is very good, but it's only as good as your combo hit effects, which in draft are also not as impactful. Really, your combos are for more pushing damage than anything. So really, I'm just not very low on this card and for draft. And then for CC, I'm not much higher. It's still bulk. Again, for almost all the same reasons, other than the one saving grace I would say is that if you are pushing any kind of really detrimental on-hit effects or really trying to push something through to get a Whelming Gust Wave hit or something like that, it does threaten the same way that Whelming Gust Wave did. But really, I just think, unfortunately, I just love this art so much. But unfortunately, it's just not good enough, I think, right now in either format.
Yeah, I think it's cool that it's our first Shuriken item. I think that's amazing. I do think the card looks really cool. I think the effect is good, but it just reminds me of a card like Amulet of Earth, which has Go Again and still isn't even that great of a card because it's like conditional on when it's good.
Yep.
And this is very much similar. It only works on combo cards. I think if this worked on any card, I think maybe it's probably different. Like if you could have this floating and you play a CNC, like that's different. But the fact that it doesn't have Go Again, the fact it doesn't block, I think if you're drafting, this is going to be one of those cards that wheels around the table, and then it's just going to be the card that ends up in someone's pile at the end because it's the last card. So I gave this draft in bulk, and then I gave it okay in CC. I can see places in which like this might be good, especially if you are playing breaking skills as well. To have 2 floating to like push your combo cards over, like a Dishonor that with effect, or a Whelming Gust Wave that has a mask trigger on top of it as well. Stuff like that I think might be good, but the fact that you have to like, you're essentially like replacing an attack for this. Like instead of playing a Snatch, I'm going to play my Shuriken and hope this gives me some value later on. So I think for the same reason people don't play like Potion of Strength, they probably won't play this.
I just wish we had a way for Ninja to cheat out an item from the deck or something. I think that would be really cool. Maybe a combo effect in the future. So maybe we'll have to revisit this one if we get more Ninja cards. Maybe when we go to Mysteria, maybe this card finds a home. So finally, our last majestic for specifically ninja is going to be Visit the Floating Dojo, which I do. Again, the flavor of this card is really cool, but it is a 0-cost blue that is an instant, so no attack or defense value on it. And it does say it's a Katsu specialization, and it says put a Surging Strike and a card with combo from your graveyard on the top and or bottom of your deck. And that's it. So I said that like I was gonna read more, but it's like that's what it does. So Visit the Floating Dojo, I gave a bulk in both draft and constructed. I was maybe a little on the fence in constructed and maybe getting this an okay. But in draft, I think this card, again, it's a non-block card. I think it's slow. You're giving up a card in your hand that could be pushing damage maybe when you need to, or needs to block when it needs to. Its effect is pretty neat in the sense that like you guarantee a Surging Strike, which is always the card you want to see in Katsu. Surging Strike is huge. And I do like the fact that it says and or on the bottom, so you can put the Surging Strike on top, and then you can put the combo card on the bottom, so that you can search it if you think you're going to hit with Katsu next turn, right? So you don't have to draw both, or you can just put them both on top, draw them, and you know you have the combo line guaranteed, maybe like a Surging Strike into a Descendant, something like that, right? So I do like that. And it's interesting, but I just think again in Blitz, or not in Blitz, but in Draft, I think it's going to be too fast of a format, especially maybe against other ninjas and against these really heavy hitting rangers. Actually, Azalea can push a lot of damage this format. I think you're just gonna, it's maybe a little too slow. In Constructed, again, I like its effect, but I think Katsu doesn't need it. I think a lot of times you want to see your Surging Strikes, but you do have other starters, you do have other power cards. And I think as far as getting the combo cards back, you don't really need those either, because you can play so many between Whelming and Descendant, between Bonds. I think there's just so much search. I love the flavor of this card, but I just don't think it sees a home in either format.
Yeah, I think so. In draft, I gave this an okay, just because I can see places where being able to set up a strong turn is good. So maybe you like block out, play this, set up Surging and Whelming on top of your deck, and you know you have at least 10 damage coming to your opponent next turn is like, or 11 damage if you have a blue is like pretty good in a draft format when that's over half their health. So I think there might be like some value, especially maybe if Fatigue is like a strategy that people go for in draft. Might not be possible, but in Constructed, I also gave this an okay, because if you are playing a Katsu deck that is playing Remembrance, this might just fill that slot, because it's like a Remembrance that's giving you a good turn next turn, or is pitch stacking your deck with maybe specific the combo line that you want, the Surging and Whelming that you want. So I do think there might be a place for this card, but I also think that just a no block that doesn't do anything other than maybe making your next turn good, but if you have to block next turn, it just didn't really do anything for you anyways. Isn't great. So I think it's niche, probably okay.
Yeah. Which is funny, because we're going to move on to a rare, which I think is one of the most insane cards I've ever printed for Ninja. So that being said, it's going to be called Bonds of Ancestry. It costs 2. It attacks for 4 and blocks for 3. However, the cost is not real. So its effect reads, combo, if a card with Gust Wave in its name was the last attack this combat chain, this costs 2 less to play and has go again, and when this attacks, you may banish a card with combo from your graveyard. If you do, search your deck for a card with the same name, banish it, then shuffle. You may play it this combat chain. So I gave this a staple in both formats. I think this is probably one of the easier cards to grade. I think you're going to agree. I think this card just does so much for Ninja in general. I think even if you're playing Benji in draft, I think it's going to be easy to get a Descendant Gust Wave. Luckily, even though Descendant Gust Wave is the second part of its combo chain, it also has go again, right? So even if you're not comboing the Descendant Gust Wave, as long as you can get into the Bonds, Descendant into Bonds, I think you're in the money, right? So this is free, and then of course having its banish effect also play the combo card, which doesn't have to be one of the cards that combo off of Bonds. Namely, it doesn't have to be Dishonor. It can be, which is great. That's an extra 4 damage for 0. But really getting any card that you can feasibly play is just free damage at that point. So I think this card is insane, both in draft and in CC. Of course, in draft it's a little bit better in Katsu because of all the searching, but I think both ninjas are going to want to play this.
Yeah, this card is probably one of the, if not the best card that Ninja has. I think our teammate Tom said this is just Katsu's best card, which is maybe true. I think in draft I give this an okay just because I don't know how often you're going to be able to like not only have the Gust Wave before it, but also have a combo card in your grave that you have another copy of that you can then play afterwards. So I just don't know if you're going to get full value out of it very often. I think in CC this is a staple. It's like one of the most insane cards in the game, Flesh and Blood. It's always, when you play it, a 0 for 8 go again, probably, because you're either getting Dishonor or you're just banishing a blue or red head jab from your graveyard and getting a red head jab. Sorry, not head jab, Flusterfist. So getting a 0 for 4 after the red one is 8 damage that you did not pay for, and it just required 1 card. It's not a hit effect, it just happens. You just need the Gust Wave before it, which is amazing.
I think that's huge. That's just when it attacks is really strong.
It's so good. This card's amazing.
And it's pummel target, for funsies. Why not?
Yeah, true.
Okay, so I think we both can agree that Bonds of Ancestry is just going to be a phenomenal card that's probably played in ninjas for quite a while. I think even if we get a talented ninja in the future from Mysteria, I think there's probably there's a good chance they might even play this line.
Yep.
All right, so Recoil is our next card. It's going to be the other rare in this set, or one of 3, or the second of 3. And it says, well, first of all, it's a 0 cost, 3 attack and 3 block combo card. And it says combo if Head Jab was the last attack this combat chain. This has when this hits a hero, they put a card from their hand on top of their deck. So for Recoil, I gave it an okay in draft. It's probably on the fence between okay and staple. I do like its effect, of course, if it hits. It's basically just commanding a card, right? It's going to be like, it's coming in for 3. It's not buffed on its own. I will say if you can get this off with Benji and you can make it come in for 4, right? Benji gives it +1 when they hit with the first card. So if this is coming in for 4, which is a breakpoint, that's pretty good. But that's a little bit of an ask for Benji just because you're not being able to search it or anything like that. You just have to have the combo line unless you play his specialization first. But yeah, so I think in Benji this is really good if you can get the line off, but I think in draft maybe it's on the fence between okay and staple just because it's a really strong effect, but most of the time it's just me commanding the 1 card it would discard anyway, most of the time. And then in Constructed, I gave this a okay as well. I do think it's a strong effect. It's just, are you going to be playing the Head Jab line? Maybe, maybe not. If we get more Head Jab cards that are really good. I just think there's not a lot of space in Katsu right now to put those cards in. But it is a really strong effect, so maybe it finds a home.
Yeah, this is one I gave okay in draft. I do think it just commands a card, which they were maybe going to give anyways. So I think it's a cool 2-card hand. The fact you can threaten 6 and a card from them is like pretty decent. Because you can search it off Katsu. I think it's better in Katsu. In Constructed, I gave this a staple just because the fact that it doesn't require like a 3-hit line. It just has Head Jab before it, so it just requires 2 cards. I think it's cool that it's a combo card, so the fact that Breaking Scales could threaten a card from them. Ninja, by default, as a class, just basically threatens damage and card draw. So the fact that we now have a card that like actually threatens interaction from the opponent, ripping a card from them, I think is cool. So I think this is a card that will probably see consideration because if you just have 6 cards in your deck, 3 red head jabs and 3 of this, you have like a disruptive line that you could maybe go for at any point to rip a card from them, and I think that's pretty good. So yeah,
absolutely. So the next card is going to be Spinning Wheel Kick. It is a 1-cost 4 attack, blocks for 2, and it does have combo. It says if Twin Twisters or Spinning Wheel Kick was the last attack this combat chain, this has +1, and when this hits, put it on the bottom of its owner's deck. And it has go again. One thing I really like this card is basically leg tap at its worst. So I think this is definitely a staple in draft. I think if you're playing Ninja, this is just a really good card. 1 for 4, go again is going to be your bread and butter. It's a breakpoint. If you do manage to draft the Twin Twisters and play it beforehand, it's a 1 for 5, which is much better. It's really, really good. And then, of course, being able to put it on the bottom of your deck isn't bad. I think there is a world where maybe the assassins do try to fatigue you, maybe a little bit, just because they block so well. And this gives you a little bit of hedging against that. So I did give Spinning Wheel Kick a staple. Yeah, definitely a staple. I do agree with that, with myself. Mainly because, again, it's leg tap at its worst, which is a great card in draft, right? So unfortunately for constructed, I did give it bulk. I don't think you're playing the Twin Twisters line at all, and being able to put this on the bottom of your deck is probably less meaningful in a game that doesn't go to fatigue. Most games in CC do not go to fatigue, so I just don't really see this getting a home in any CC deck.
So in draft, I agree. I think it's a staple. I think 1 for 4 go again just is great in a draft format. I think the potential, if you draft multiple of this card, to be able to play them after each other, search one off Katsu, is really good. Go again in a format with not a lot of it, great. And I think for CC, I also gave this a staple, so I'm going to hard disagree on this one. So for one thing, it's a really good bonds target because it's a combo card. Searching for a 1 for 4 go again off of bonds, you can keep going. I think is very strong. I do think Twin Twisters is okay as a card. Like, I think it's fine, especially if you're playing Be Like Water. You can actually choose to make that Twin Twister. So this is a 1 for 5 go again. Recycle it, put it on the bottom of your deck. So that's another thing you can do if you somehow like get it off bonds, play a Twin Twisters, then play this. It recycles itself into your deck if it hits, which is cool. Yeah, I think this card's cool, and I think the other card that we talked about, the 2 for 5 that comes after it, also might see some niche play, and it needs this card to work really. So yeah, I think this card actually might be a consideration that people would choose maybe over leg tap potentially.
Okay, moving on to Back Heel Kick. It is a 0 cost, hits for 3, blocks for 3. Does have combo. It says if Twin Twisters was the last attack this combat chain, this has if Back Heel Kick would gain attack, instead it gains that much +1. I gave this an okay. I do know it does synergize itself with the Twin Twisters line pretty well, because Twin Twisters has the effect that you can choose to give the next card +1, so this would actually get the +2. Being a 0 for 5 would be very good, but Twin Twisters does have to hit for that particular effect to go off, so it's kind of like not the craziest thing. It does work with Shuriken as well, though, too. So we give Shuriken would give this +2, which is also very nice if you happen to draft a Shuriken. So I do give this an okay in draft. I do think it's at worst again a 0 for 3. This is a bit of a finisher. It doesn't have go again, right? So that's also something to note, that your line just goes Twin Twisters into Back Heel Kick, or it could be like water, like you said. But really, that wouldn't be as good, because if it's Be Like Water, then you're not giving it the +1, right? So in Constructed, I just think you're definitely not playing this in any world. I really don't see it. I mean, there's cute lines you could do where you give it +1 a bunch of times, and really you're giving it +2 a bunch of times. Things like, of course, its own effect with Twin Twisters, that's +2. You can Breaking Scales it for another +2. You can Shuriken it for +2. You can... also, this does work with another card that we talked about, the Majestic. The Head Leads the Tail would be really cute to play this in draft, just going back to that. But
Ancestral Empowerment works on it.
Ancestral Empowerment as well. So there are a lot of cute things you can do. Again, I just don't know how much... Again, you have to be playing Twin Twisters, and you have to also be playing this card, and you have to also play them together. And I just think there's so many powerful things that Ninja can do. I just don't know if this really finds a home in any deck.
Yeah, I gave this okay in draft. It's a 3 block. If you do have something like Fisticuffs in draft, this also affects it, where your Fisticuffs becomes 2 value instead of just paying 2 for 1 buff. That's a card we'll talk about later, but I think that's like cute. I think in Constructed, this is a draft card. I don't have too much to say about it. I don't think it's good. I don't think on Twin Twisters, when you're playing it, you're ever choosing the first effect. I think you're always playing Twin Twisters as a 1 for 4 go again. So you have the breakpoint, so Katsu would trigger off of your off of it hitting, because it's harder to block a 4 attack. And just the fact that it's just damage, doesn't have go again, I don't think it's good.
All right, so next attack is going to be Like Water. 0 cost attack. Has 3 damage on the red, 2 block value, and it says when this hits, you may pay 1. If you do, choose Head Jab, Surging Strike, or Twin Twisters. This gains that chosen name, and it has go again. So at worst, it's a Head Jab for you. Not too bad. Probably going to command a block most of the time because I think if they're going to block this, then maybe they're hoping that this hits, and so you can choose a name. For Be Like Water, I gave it a staple in draft. I think you're going to be windmill slamming maybe even the yellows and the blues, to be completely honest. It's still a 0 cost blue, right? And even if you play the blue, it's probably going to command the same block the red does, specifically because the effect is so strong in Katsu. And then I gave it a bulk in constructed. I just think it's too easy to block. I think, again, I'm just so hard on like the power level of what Ninja can be doing. I think you're not really probably playing multiple lines in draft, or I'm sorry, in constructed, at least like not the Head Jab and the Surging Strike, or like the Surging Strike and the Twin Twisters. Personally, I don't think you're doing that. And of course, if you're relying on this to hit for like your big turn, and they just block it, you're a sad panda. So, for that, I gave it bulk and constructed, but I think it's very good in draft.
I did give this a staple in draft. I think just a Head Jab with upside is super good. The fact that you can turn it into anything if they let it hit is really strong for Katsu being able to switch for a combo card. I also gave this a staple in CC. I haven't actually seen a new Katsu list that doesn't play this card, just because it's a go again card that probably always demands a block from them. If they don't block it, they're probably going to get punished in some capacity. And I do like that you can Ancestral it so that it gets over. You can like kind of force this to hit in some situations. And I have seen turns where like you play this card and they give you a card and then you actually play a Surging Strike afterwards. And they're like, oh, I already gave up the like card, or I was only going to block with 2 cards and I only have 1 left and I can't block the Surging. So yeah, sure, get your Whelming. And then the Whelming is going to hit 2 now. So I think it pulls a card from them almost always, which is good. But I do think you're correct in that sometimes this will be like, oh, I need this to hit. So hopefully they don't give me a card or 2 and then they give you like a card or 2 and you're like, oh, well, my turn's terrible now. So I do think it can be a trap. Yeah.
I like the disagreements. I really do, because it's going to be fun to look back on this, because I was worried we were going to be too similar, and then we're just like, well. So moving on to, I think the next card is going to be Deadly Duo. Deadly Duo is a 1 cost 3 attack, blocks for 2. Says when this hits, the next attack action card with 2 or less base base attack you play, this combat chain gains +2. So I gave this card a staple in draft. I think mainly it shows Benji on the card, which is interesting, because I think if you're playing the yellows or the blues, this comes in for 2 or 1 in draft, which makes this very hard to block. You have to either block it from Arsenal or with one of like the prevention effects, something like that, because you can't really block it from hand. And then its on-hit effect like couples with Benji very well. So like if you're already playing something lower but you just want to smack them really hard, you're going to be coming in for 5. And even if you're playing Katsu, this does command a block probably, right? Because you just don't want to give up that effect. You don't want something like, it's not a combo card that Katsu really wants, but really I think just having this coming in, even as Katsu, you give something like I don't know, like a yellow Descendant Gust Wave, like a lot of damage. So I think along those lines, you're kind of just like, you're probably blocking this card. There's so many cards in Ninja, I think, that you're just like, you probably have to block, and at some point you're going to have to not block, right? So I think this does command a block, so I think that's very good in draft, so I gave it a staple. As far as constructed goes, I gave it bulk, but maybe that was a CC rating. I think this does slot into Benji most likely. You are probably playing this in some capacity in a Benji deck, but I wasn't really thinking of that when I was giving this rating. I was thinking more of like our adult Ninja heroes, and I just don't think this is being played in any of those. There is maybe a use case for Phoenix Flames, but I don't think so. I don't think you're going to be doing that.
Yeah, so I gave this a staple in draft. I agree with everything that you said. Really strong. It probably demands a card for them. If not, you got a 1 for 5 go again, which is strong. I gave this an okay in CC because I do see a world in which like something like Fi is playing this because it does affect Phoenix Flames. It affects all of your yellow and blue head jab cards you're playing in that deck as well. So it could see consideration maybe in something like Fi. So I think it could be a card that like as ninjas come out, you're gonna be like, oh, Deadly Duo actually might slot well into this deck. But I just think it's okay. I don't think it's gonna be a staple or anything like that.
Sounds good. All right, Descendant Gustwave. Really strong card, I think, but reading it off, it's going to be a 1 cost, 3 attack, 2 block. It says combo if Surging Strike was the last attack this combo chain. It costs 1 less, and it has +2 attacks, so it would be a 0 for 5 at that point, and it has Go Again on its own, even though it's combo card. I like that they did that with some of the combo cards, so you're able to combo with like the middle pieces, not necessarily if you have the starter card. So Descendant Gustwave, I gave an okay in draft and an okay in constructed. Now I know that sounds a little weird considering how high we were on bonds, and I know that our good our good rating is a staple. So funny enough, I do think this is a staple in constructed. I think you're probably playing the bonds line and Descendant Gustwave. However, I was looking at the power level of the card itself, and it's okay. I think a lot of times it's going to be a 1-costed head jab. Of course, if you do pair this with Surging Strike into this, it's a 5 damage attack Descendant Gustwave. But then I think what kind of held me up in my constructed rating was I'm just comparing it to Whelming. And I think Whelming for 0 for 4 draw card is just so much more impactful that, like, on its own, right? Of course, Whelming does also go into bonds as well, but it doesn't go into Dishonor, right? So there was a little bit of like a mix in my head of like, where should I put this card? I'm just comparing it to Whelming. That's why I give it okay. I think you're still probably playing it in some capacity and like every time you're playing bonds. So maybe I should have given it staple, but just know it's on the fence there. And then in draft, it's a 1 for 3 a lot of the time. How often are you going to get Surging Strike ahead of it? Just depends how many Surging Strikes you find. And a 1 for 3 is okay. We just have so many 0 for 3s that have upside that I kind of was like, on its own, it's okay. You're probably going to draft it. If you see it like pick like 5 or 6, you're happy. You're like really happy it's still there. I just don't know how early in the pack you're going to draft it, especially pack 1, right? So that's kind of where I'm at with Descendant Gustwave.
Sure. So I give this a staple in both formats. So for draft, I think I think Bonds is such a insane card that if you're able to get it, you need the enabler for it, which this is the only enabler in draft. So like, you really do need this card. As a starter, it's overcosted as a starter, but enabling an insane card, I think, makes this like something that you always want to think about taking. And then in constructed, I also think it's a staple because having a combo card that can be the starter, so you don't always need surging, which is kind of the problem with the current surging strike line, or was, is that like if you don't have surging, you have to like Razor or Snapdragon or Boots your Whelming and get over so that you can then move on with your combo line, whereas you could just start with this and then get a Bonds if this hits, or already have a Bonds in Arsenal or whatever it is. So I think enabling Bonds is really strong. And then sometimes when you know you're going for the Dishonor line, you can search this instead of the Whelming Gustwave so that you can threaten that blanking your hero ability effect. So I think in Always, this is probably just a staple. Yeah.
It's like funny. I think we agree a lot on our reasonings. It's just like, I was like,
yeah. Same reasoning, different score. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, I was just like on that CC rating. I was like, when I'm just comparing it to Whelming, I'm just like, I would rather see a Whelming after a Surging Strike than a Descendant. But yeah, I definitely agree that it's definitely a staple in both, most likely. So, finally, our last new ninja card is a 1-2 punch. It's a 0 for 3. And it also blocks for 3, which is nice in Ninja, and it's a combo card and says if Head Jab was the last attack this combat chain, this has when this hits a hero, deal 2 damage to them. So I gave this a staple in draft, mainly because I think 0 for 5s are always good. especially the only thing, like maybe I could have put it okay again. I'm worried about how often we're comboing off with either Katsu or Benji. I'm trying to go back to my Welcome to Wraith days of when we were drafting Katsu, and a lot of times it just became value cards, not necessarily combo lines, right? Sometimes you get a couple combo lines, but really it was just like, oh, I can play like Kodachi, big attack or something like that, right? So on its own, it's just a Kodachi head jab without go again. So it's kind of where I was worried about it. But again, it's only a 2-card combo line, so head jab into this feels pretty good. It's going to give them most likely a card, which I've noticed a lot of the head jab line cards say that, right? Basically, give me a card. And usually they're going to not block the head jab either, right? Maybe they block it if you're Katsu, but if you're Benji, they're probably going to just let the head jab through because why not? I mean, it's like a crappy scar for scar at that point. And so there's just better things that can be blocking like this card. So usually you get in 3 damage and then you get this card, right? So I think it's pretty good. I think I gave it staple in draft, and then in constructed I did give it bulk because it's just not good enough. The damage in constructed is just not high enough. You can get 5 damage almost anywhere else. I think there's just too many things that give 5 damage unconditionally and maybe even have go again, whereas this just doesn't do that.
Yeah. So for this one, I gave it okay in draft just because I think it's best in Benji when it becomes unblockable. So if you have a yellow or blue one, it becomes unblockable with Benji's ability, and then you're sneaking in 2 more damage, which is cool. But you do have to have the head jab before it and also have this card in that same hand. You can't search unless you have the Majestic, of course. And in constructed, I gave this a bulk card. This is certainly much worse than recoil, which we've already gone over. Recoil is just so much better. You don't play this in constructed.
No, you don't. So that's it for Ninja. Do you want to take a break real quick? We've been recording for an hour and a half.
Oh my gosh.
So I'm going to
see multiple videos or what?
I think we might want to do multiple recording sessions.
But just one video?
Yeah.
Dang.
I do want it to be like one long like anthology that people can come back to.
Okay.